So it's really important to recognise that we can be great media operators, but at the end of the day, having good media contacts is probably the most important part of our game. So if you're a local drug action team that feels that they know how to manage the media and generate those stories, how to pitch, well, how is it that you actually really harness good journalists and get them on side? So we'll have a couple of questions about that. Jill, I'm going to ask you the first question. How does a community group get to the top of, say, your contact list when it comes to looking for some reactionary comments on a local drug and alcohol story?
That's a pretty simple one, Ilka. Answer your phone. Always answer your phone when we call. There's a reason that you'll find the same talking heads in the media a lot. It's because those people answer their phone when we're on deadline. So if you are always prepared, if you see a story breaking, you think that you could have some input into it, have your spokespeople ready to go, have your case studies ready to go, have a reaction ready to go, so when that journalist calls or even put out a media release, you are actually in the story, you're part of it. For us, when we have multiple deadlines and we're working under intense pressure, having someone answer the phone when we call them and we've got 15 minutes to get a quote into the story, that makes all the difference. So that would be my first piece of advice. The other thing is to always be honest and always be helpful. I think one of the good things about you, Ilka, that I've noticed over the years when we've worked together is you generally don't pitch me a story that's not a story.
Yeah.
So I think don't waste our time is what I'm saying really, is that if you're pitching a story that you kind of know isn't really going to get a run in the media outlet that you're pitching it to, then that doesn't help to establish trust.
Also, if I'm looking from my side of the fence, so if I'm taking into account that you say pick up your phone and be prepared, if you're a local drug action team and you know that what you're advocating on might be alcohol advertising on bus stops, or you might be advocating around keeping children in school for longer, then in that being prepared, it's important that you have those key messages, or you have like a media template that if an issue does break, you can quickly fill that in and then flick them to your media contacts. So you're inserting yourself in the issue very quickly. I've found that that's worked in terms of my game is being prepared, because sometimes you're not going to be at the top of your contact list, and doing things like that can actually help you get on top of their list, because they see, oh, you're organised. You know what you're saying, and you're ready to pick up that phone call if they need you at the last minute.
You don't want to become rent-a-quote, but at the same time, you want to be front of mind. But yeah, we get so many media releases that if you send out too many, we will switch off. So I would say pick your battles, pick your story. Is this something that you really want to inject yourself into the story? If it's something that's really going to garner attention for you, or is it just a bit marginal and you could wait till next time? I think, less is more in that regard.
And we all have heard of cash for comment and all those sorts of wonderful things. How appropriate is it if I'm to ask you to lunch or to have a coffee to discuss whatever it is that I'm focusing on as a local drug action team? Does that look like I'm doing something?
Oh, not at all. I think unless you're like wanting to pay to renovate my conservatory, I think it's okay. I think generally going out for coffee, having lunch, that's absolutely fine. I think that's how you actually build a relationship with a journalist. It's much better than just being a faceless person on the end of the phone. So, of course. So, Ilka, in your experience with journalists, how have you gone with getting your quotes high up in the story? What are your tips for making sure that your voice is heard in those stories?
I'm a big believer that saying something that's catchy. So I'll give you a good example. We were talking about synthetic cannabis, and some of you may know, might not know, is that you'll never know what exactly you're getting. That's why we've seen a lot of fatalities around synthetic cannabis. And the line that I put out to the media was, it's like playing Russian roulette with your life. Now, in that quote, I knew that was going to be page one source, as Jill likes to call it. She says, put a little page one source on it. That people love those headlines. They're catchy. It's easy for Jim in his stubby shorts when he's sitting on his couch to understand. It's going to catch your eye. You don't want to push it too far though. You want to still keep the seriousness about the issue, because we are talking about alcohol and drugs. But I think it's important to throw those catchy lines out.
Absolutely. And yeah, I can give another example similar to that. When a few years ago I started writing about alcohol abuse, and it was a series that we were intending to run around Australia's binge drinking culture. And I was speaking to a researcher who said to me that he believed this was a ticking time bomb for Australia's public health. And from that one throwaway line, we ended up with a front page story about alcohol's time bomb, and it had a red wine glass on its side with wine spilling out of it like a blood splatter, and that became the series, you know, on because it was a very serious issue. And I know that some people might find that, oh well, maybe that's dumbing down, or maybe is it sensationalizing it, but it's sort of like, you know, you're feeding a toddler and you've got to get the plane into the hangar. You're giving them some serious information, but to get them to that story, you might just have to, as Ilka says, pour a bit of page one sauce on it to get them to come to the story.
Keep it real and non-bureaucratic. And I think sometimes, like, I know if I'm not giving the journalist what they need, because they start giving me leading sentences like, it's devastating, don't you think, that X, Y, Z. So they want you to say, oh, it's devastating, you know? So sometimes you can pick up on the cues that the journalists are giving you in terms of making the story a little bit more exciting. This one's for you, Jill.
Yeah.
You've reported a lot on health issues, in particular on alcohol and drugs. What would you say about the use of language, or specifically terminology like addict, and the importance of getting it right without adding to stigma?
Yeah, this is a really tricky one. It's a really hard balance to strike for journalists, because the kind of language that you would not hear so much in the alcohol and drug sector, because you guys have obviously been very well educated on removing stigma. It does still exist in newsrooms. Now, I have taken it upon myself, having worked in health reporting for a long time, to try and work with my journalists in the newsroom to change that language. But it's generally people with outside the specialties, so outside of health reporting itself, that might not know that language so much. So, you know, that can be up to you when you're dealing with journalists to educate them and say, well, we don't like... I think the word junkie, you would very rarely hear that anymore, certainly in the mainstream press, but you may still hear it on talkback radio and that sort of thing. A lot of people don't see it as offensive, so you know that can be up to you.
Maybe, and what's worked for me is that just to spend a little time with the journalist, you know, walking them through that so they understand, instead of us just looking like people saying, please don't write this, and wagging the finger and telling them and pushing their pen. They don't like that. So does that work?
Yeah, that's definitely an important point. But again, that comes down to the relationship you have with the journalist. So it comes back to that trust. So if you've got some time to sit down with them and explain why it matters, rather than just calling them up and berating them saying you got that wrong, that's not going to really change behaviour. But you also have to be realistic. We work under immense and intense time pressure. So often when you use the word addict rather than drug user, that would be the word you would use? Drug dependent. That's realistically, a lot of newsrooms are going to push back against that and say, well, that's just, you know, it's just language that is clunky and doesn't work so well for us. So you have to be realistic. But I think the way that you change attitudes is by developing those relationships and finding a journalist who can actually get their head around the issue from, you know, a whole, a sort of holistic point of view, and see it as wider than just about policing language.
How does someone build a good relationship with a journalist? I know it's a broad question.
Well, I mean, trust is really number one thing. So you want to establish trust with the journalist, then that takes time. It takes potentially having coffee with them and explaining to them what it is that you do and why it matters, and the people whose stories that you're trying to tell. I know that's not always possible, particularly when journalists are so busy, but certainly in the local media there'll be a lot more time, and you might have you might already know that person. They might be in your community. You might have mutual friends or mutual contacts that can help build those bridges.
And when I worked in a regional area, I was able to literally, you know, walk into the newspaper or the radio station and just say, hey, look, you know, I've, you know, part of X, Y, and Z, you know, can I speak to, you know, this reporter? You'll see them down at the coffee shop or down in the, you know, the restaurants. Like, don't be afraid to just go up and introduce yourself if you are in that regional rural setting. Everybody knows everybody. But again, it is different with metro. So, if I was to approach Jill for the first time, and which I did, I phoned her, I emailed her, I asked her out for coffee, we caught up, and that relationship built from there. But, it is hard trying to get into the diaries of metropolitan or suburban journalists. And I'll pick up on what Jill said, which is, be persistent, and don't be afraid to be a little bit pushy to get in the door with those journalists and then build those relationships. So hopefully you have got a better understanding about what makes a journalist tick and how it is that you can build on those relationships with journalists, because as we know, it's super important that we use the media effectively to communicate what cause we're connected to and trying to make a difference in. So if you need any help, don't be afraid to contact the Alcohol and Drug Foundation. Read on, there's lots of information on this website. We are available to give you help at any time. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you.
Any parting words?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that journalists are human just like you. We're trying to get the information out to the public just as you are, so don't be scared. Show us a little bit of trust and we'll trust you right back.
That's perfect. Thank you.